At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Dès ma première rencontre avec M. Nehru, Delhi et à Chandigarh,
How from being a totally dusty plain, Chandigarh is now covered with greenery.
City must grow. It must be given a direction.
Hello and welcome to the Story of Chandigarh, a podcast about how the modernist city of Chandigarh came into being and what its future might look like. This is Ishan Shafla, and with me is Dr. Vikramāditya Prakāsh. In this episode, we will discuss why there was a need for a new capital city, the partition of India and Pakistan and its aftermath, the process of recruiting architects to design the new city, the selection of the site, Nehruvian modernism, and the Garden City movement.
So when do you think the idea of Chandigarh first came into being? Was that as soon as the British left India, or was it a while after that?
Well, that's a really good question. I think what happened was that when the British left, of course, they did the partition of India, and Punjab was partitioned and Bengal was partitioned, right? And I think basically these two states which were partitioned, Bengal's Calcutta came to India, but Punjab's Lahore went to Pakistan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a quid pro quo, one city went to Pakistan, one city went to India in this division. And of course, Lord Louis Mountbatten wanted Calcutta to come to India because that was the great British Indian city and the sort of Bhadralok city and the Babu city. And Lahore, the great old Mughal capital, Mughal city went to Pakistan because since that was supposed to be a Muslim state. So then Punjab didn't have a capital. So everybody said, we need our own capital for Punjab. And that's when the decision to make Chandigarh kind of started to bubble to the surface. Because initially, there was this thing that, Punjab needs a new capital because Lahore's gone to Pakistan. So why don't we just pick some city in Punjab, right?
Right. I've read that there was a discussion on Amritsar and a few other potential candidates for that.
That's right. Now, Amritsar and Ambala were the two, and I think Ludhiana also, but Amritsar and Ambala were the two big contenders.
Mm-hmm.
And Amritsar would have been a natural choice because it's historic Punjabi city, But the problem with Amritsar was too close to the border.
Yeah.
Right? How far?
Right next to it, actually.
Right next. It's like 10 miles from the border, no? Wagah border, which is also famous with all the parades and Salam and all that. So they couldn't make Amritsar because, they thought war with Pakistan could happen anytime and so on. And so they said, we must pick some other city.
Ambala is an odd choice.
Ambala was, I suppose, now retrospectively, it looks like an odd choice. Also because Ambala is now in Haryana, no?
Right.
So, but Ambala was central to undivided Punjab. Remember, Punjab was undivided at that time. There was no Haryana, and parts of Himachal were also in Punjab.
Yeah.
So Ambala was in the middle of the city, of the state. So it was like a nice central town, and they thought that could be a capital.
So eventually, the decision to make a brand new city was that just, unilaterally Nehru's decision?
To the best of my knowledge, it was unilaterally Nehru's decision. Against the odds, I don't think anybody else was really advocating for that. There was various people saying, Ambala banao, some other people saying Ludhiana banao. Somebody was saying, why not Shimla and, Himachal Pradesh can be integrated in. There were all kinds of contenders, and maybe partly Nehru just didn't want to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
But partly also, I think he wanted to give an answer to New Delhi. Right. British had just made New Delhi as their imperial capital. And he said, India has become independent. We will make our own,
Chandigarh.
city. And he didn't, and New Delhi was colonial. And so he wanted a different city. So I think he just decided, no, I'm going to make a response to New Delhi, and we're going to make a modernist city. I think Nehru just made the decision.
And who introduced Nehru to modernism or like modernist thinking?
Oh, that's a really good question. Who introduced Nehru to modernism?
Like, why did he think that was the way to go?
Yeah, that is a really good question, man. And basically, I think, Nehru was a modernist to the core. I mean, in his heart, he was a modernist. He was trained in the liberal institutions of London, Cambridge and all the places. He studied Eton and Cambridge, and he believed in, and he read the liberal ideologies and wrote them into the Indian Constitution. And he just felt that modernization. So basically, he felt India had to modernize, right? And what that meant was industrialize for him. And the expression of industrialization was supposed to be modernism. So that was basically his thinking. We have to industrialize, but we are going to industrialize in a manner that leapfrogs the West. And we don't want to go through the ills of industrialization, all this sort of pollution and squalor that came about. And we want to leapfrog the West, but industrialize. And modernism, in particularly modern architecture, was an answer to that. The arts and crafts movement was big in India. There was the Jaipur School of Art, Lahore School of Art, even Sir J.J. School of Art.
NID?
NID came later. Nehru made NID as a modernist institution. But there were all these arts and craft institutions, and the British were in part pushing arts and crafts, like Indian art and Indian architecture should be based on Indian arts and crafts. And I think that rankled also Nehru a little bit. It's like, they just think of us as arts and crafts people, as if we can't be modernist and, be industrial. So I think he sort of said, no, we are going to be modernist. And he had already made the decision to build the dams, the big hydroelectric dams. And so he felt that this was a good correlate to all that.
Don't you think there's an inherent contradiction in this sort of borrowed modernism? On one side, he's trying to deny or, move past the British heritage, which is exemplified in Delhi, make a brand new city. But again, its starting point is based on borrowed ideology, which Green Revolution and, Western architects.
Yes. So this is a very common and standard allegation against Chandigarh is like, we just became independent and now we want to borrow from the West, man. And in part, it's of course true. But I think there were a couple of things to it. Modernism did not present itself as Western architecture. Classical styles presented them as great Western architectures and so on. Modernism presented itself as universal architecture, as international style, as the architecture of the modern industrial age. It did not present itself as, French or English or American or later on we say it was Western. They claim it to be Western, but there were contradictions in it. But modern architecture presented itself as being international, right? And in that sense, for Nehru, I think there was no contradiction about adopting modernism. Adopting modernism was like adopting technology. Technology does not present itself as being Western, you see. And the other associated idea with that basically was that, through the 150 years or 200 years that the British ruled India, that was the precise period in which industrialization took place in the West, certainly in England. And with industrialization, Europe's wealth went from less than that of China and India to like 100 times the size of China.
Yeah.
So the thinking of post-colonial India under Nehru was you colonized and supposedly modernized India, but all the benefits of modernization and industrialization accrued only to the West and not to us. And so it was just like, well, we are going to get our share of industrialization.
So India had some catching up to do in that sense.
Yeah, catching up basically. And so they said we're going to use whatever technology is available and all the things that go with it. We're just going to enter into modern civilization. And modernism wasn't considered Western.
And going off of that, was Chandigarh always meant to be an automobile city, like a city based on motorized traffic? Was that a core part of the urban plan?
No, I don't think that was a core part of the urban plan. As far as Nehru concerned, he had no idea what modern city should be. Okay. So, and in fact, he was like, who is going to design this first? And he asked around and he wanted to see, he says, does anybody in India know how to design a modern city? And they said, oh, well, we don't know how to design a model town. There was this discussion about model towns. The Indian bureaucrats came up and said, model town, we know how to make model towns. Like there was a model town in Lahore, there was a model town, but these were colonial model towns. And Nehru didn't want model towns.
Well, Jaipur was a sort of
Jaipur was a modern city, but in its own way, right? So he could have used Jaipur as an example, but it was not an industrial city or a city of the industrial age.
Yeah.
So he asked around and he found out there's this American planner working with Gandhiji called Albert Meyer. Albert Meyer had come to India as part of the World War II. And Albert Meyer was an American town planner. And he over here started to read about Gandhiji, and he went to Mahatma Gandhi and he said, okay, I'm an urban planner and I would like to offer you my services to build India. Gandhiji said to him, no, we don't need your services to make new towns and modern towns. You help me make a model village. So Meyer was working with Gandhiji, trying to make a model village I think, Etawah in Uttar Pradesh. Then Nehru heard about this American planner is working with Gandhiji, and he went to him and said, okay, I want to make a new city. And Meyer said, yes, I know how to make a new city, and I can make you a new city. And so that's how he hired Albert Meyer to make Chandigarh.
And he sort of abandoned the Gandhi project, it sounds like.
No, Meyer kept doing the Gandhi project. So there was a conflict in between, like on the one hand, he was working on the Gandhi project, and then he was working also on the Chandigarh project. And then Meyer hired Mathew Nowicki to work with him.
Right.
So Albert Meyer was basically a planner. So he said, okay, there are these big buildings to be made. Who is going to design it? And Albert Meyer went to his good friend Louis Mumford, the American urban theorist and strong critic of Corbusier. And at that time, Louis Mumford had heard of Mathew Nowicki. Mathew Nowicki was a rising star in America. He had just made 2-3 buildings. He had worked with Saarinen, and Louis Mumford had helped him get the chairmanship of I think, North Carolina University, the architecture program. To support him. He was a Polish emigre architect running from the Nazis, basically. And I think Louis Mumford sort of thought of Nowicki as his son. And so he connected Albert Meyer to Mathew Nowicki and put them together. And then Mathew Nowicki came to Chandigarh. Well, not Chandigarh, he came to Shimla. And he started to design Chandigarh. And essentially, Mathew Nowicki sort of made all the drawings for Chandigarh.
So what year are we talking here?
So we are talking 1950, I think, 1950, 51. 50, 51.
He passed in 51?
I think so. We should look up the date of when Mathew Nowicki died.
September 1950 in the Libyan desert.
Yeah.
So maybe we should back up a little and go back to the partition.
Yes.
So the British have left. It's August 47, and Lord
Lord Louis
Mountbatten
Mountbatten
who
was the
drew
last
the
one.
lines.
Yeah, yeah. Trafford Cripps made the actual line, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Mountbatten organized the partition. Yes.
I see, I see.
Yeah.
So once they've drawn those lines and chaos ensues and there's mass migration on both sides, we tend to hear more about the horrific side of partition, the trauma and the tragedy and the killings. On the Punjab side, was it equally as bad in the East and West Pakistan?
Well, it depends on who you read, because the killing started actually first in Bengal. And then Mahatma Gandhi famously went on a fast, hunger
Fast, yeah.
fast in Calcutta. And he said, okay, if the killings don't stop, I'm just going to starve myself to death. So I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think because of Gandhi's presence in Calcutta, the killings stopped over there. Yeah, but he went to Calcutta, but Punjab suffered. Yeah, the trauma of partition haunts Chandigarh. And I think in part for Nehru also, the making of Chandigarh was meant to sort of sublimate, sort of erase and elevate the trauma of partition, like to say, okay, that happened, but now we are going to, start anew and build anew and put that behind us.
Like the rising of the phoenix.
Like the rising of the phoenix
The
from
ashes.
its own ashes, that's yeah, well-quoted phrase. And I think that's also partly why he wanted to make a modernist city, because he didn't want to make a Punjabi city or a Sikh city or a Muslim city or a Hindu city, because because he cast India in the secular mold, right? The nation state in the secular mold. And he wanted the city to represent that idea of secularism.
So it's an aspirational city.
It was aspirational. And this idea, Nehru's idea of secularism, was taken straight from, Western literature, which is why the current governments, hate Nehruvian secularism as a concept. But it was central to Nehru's thinking.
Would you also say it was a utopian city in a sense?
Yeah, in that sense, it was definitely utopian. Very definitely utopian. I mean, it set very high expectations. So let this be a new city, unfettered by the traditions of the past and a symbol of a nation's faith in the future. In this famous Nehru quote, which we don't know the source for, but is attributed to Nehru as this sort of dictum for Chandigarh, cast it in this utopian mold. The entire Nehruvian nation state was utopian, his entire aspiration of what India would be as this secular, post-colonial, enlightened place which leapfrogged the Industrial Revolution, which had Marxist, leftist worker protections, which had all the religions protected and so on, were all utopian aspirations.
But then Chandigarh is given the, you could say, responsibility of embodying Nehruvian idea of a nation state that doesn't look back.
That's right. That's right. So in that sense, Chandigarh was built as the capital of India, of Nehruvian India.
In opposition to Delhi already.
That's right. It really was imagined as the capital of Nehruvian India.
So going off of that, I was reading this on the flight. So there's a passage in here which quotes Deleuze. Literature is about inventing a missing people, not addressing a people which is presupposed already there, but contributing to the invention of people. So I wanted to bring that up because I was thinking of, who were the imagined inhabitants of Chandigarh, and was Nehru and, the architects of the city imagining a new population that didn't exist, or were they had in mind a certain kind of people that were already around looking for a home. I mean, obviously, the people displaced by partition have to be mentioned here.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Really amazing quote you pulled up. I'd never heard of that. So that's a really good quote. And it says literature is designed to invent a new people. And in that sense, Chandigarh as an architecture was definitely designed to invent a new personhood. And it was designed to invent a new citizen. What is an ideal citizen of the Indian nation state was to be invented there. And Nehru was trying to invent this citizen over here as this secular, participatory, democratic, science and technology driven, new aesthetic. And many people who built Chandigarh and resided in it, and certainly like people like my father, Aditya Prakāsh, but also, Ebenezer Howard, B.N. Goswami, the artists, etc. Everybody who sort of Mulk Raj Anand in Bombay and part of Chandigarh, and they were all trying to invent a new India and a new Indian citizen.
Yeah. In that sense, you could argue it's a success because it was the perfect place for these people to flourish, the architects that were part of the project. And then Chandigarh was the ideal platform for them to sort of start anew and find themselves.
I think to a certain extent, yes. I mean, to a certain extent, these kind of artists, architects, theater people, and maybe even to a certain extent, institutional heads and politicians and lawyers came to be in Chandigarh. But the point is, while in the imagination, in the literary imagination of Chandigarh, there was this citizen being produced, the brief for Chandigarh was written as a bureaucratic city. A.L. Fletcher wrote the brief, who was an Indian civil service Babu. And he wrote a brief for 16 levels of officers who were all sort of in the British colonial administration mode.
I thought A.L. Fletcher was a white person by the
No.
sound of it.
He was a Kerala Christian.
So Fletcher was brought on also by Nehru.
So Fletcher was the
advisor.
special officer in charge. He was a member of the Indian Civil Service who was assigned this job as a high-level bureaucrat to write the brief for Chandigarh. Like what are the requirements for building a new city? What are the levels of housing and what all? And then he was also asked to research that Nehru wants a modern city, and what is a modern city? And he researched and read books, and mostly he read Ebenezer Howard and studied the New Towns movement in London, and came to the conclusion. He's the one who cast the idea of the garden city. Chandigarh as a garden city was sort of written up as his interpretation of Nehru's dictum that this has to be a modern city, and wrote the first major brief on what Chandigarh needs to be.
Would you say it's a sort of manifesto?
Yeah, you can say it's a kind of a manifesto, but it was, if you see his report, it's there in the Chandigarh museum. Yeah, it's the very first of the Randhawa paper folders. It's like a huge report. It's like a 100-page report, and he lays it out. Here are the types of housing. Here the sort of greenery. Here is where the water, how much water is needed. Everything he lays out, and he says what a garden city is, what its history is, and what it needs to be. In a modern city is a garden city, and we need an architect who understands what a garden city is. So what I'm saying over here is the actual citizens inhabited, imagined, proposed for Chandigarh were administrators. It was an administrative city. Now, in Nehru's imagination, these administrators were all enlightened, and they would produce this modern citizen, which is this imagined citizen that we're talking about, and that they would bring along with them a modern, becoming private citizen. So your question was, did it succeed? So you tell me, is Chandigarh today, are the Chandigarh people modernist? Or are they bureaucrats and rich money-making Punjabis like you and me?
Good question. I don't know. But you get the sense that the modernist ethos may have faded a little or transformed over time to something else.
Hmm.
I was reading in your book, Chandigarh's Le Corbusier, The Struggle for Modernity in Post-Colonial India. You say about Fletcher, that the core parts of Fletcher's ideology was that the garden city has three components. There's the administrative, and there's the university town, and then there's the industrial side of it.
Mhm.
And so he had basically predefined the program for the city and how
Right.
these three were linked by the network of transportation.
Right.
Yeah, so these three are sort of not so close to each other. They're scattered and they're interdependent, and they're sort of the pillars of the modern city. And this was also consistent in the Meyer plan as well.
Yes, absolutely. This was the brief that was
Yeah.
given to Albert Meyer. And Albert Meyer was, he was New York, New Jersey-based planner, very close to Letchworth and Ebenezer Howard's garden cities, that the first garden cities that were laid out in New Jersey. And he knew and understood those really well. So the separation and those cities were made over there as critiques of places like New York and London that had industry inside the city, and there was pollution, and housing was squalor, and there was no greenery anywhere. So this was the plan given to Albert Meyer, and Albert Meyer made a sprawling garden city. Sprawling. It was much bigger than the city Corbusier made. So Meyer completely took the plan and drew it up.
So before this, was Meyer aware of where obviously he knew where the site was for Chandigarh, and that was, I think, selected by P.L. Varma and Thapar.
By P.N. Thapar and P.L. Varma, yes. So
P.N. Thapar.
after Fletcher kind of wrote the draft, then P.L. Varma was the chief engineer put in charge of the project. Varma was the engineer, and P.N. Thapar was the administrator put in charge. And they selected the site by aerial reconnaissance. They boarded a flight from Palam Airport, the old Palam Airport in the middle of Delhi, and flew over Punjabi heartland, and they picked it from the air.
What did they see from the plane? It wasn't empty land. It was, from what I know, there was some life there. There was villages, and
there's no such place as empty land anywhere in India.
Yeah.
So there were villages there, but I think the main thing was it was right next to the Himalayas. And the engineer P.L. Varma said it's right next to the Himalayas, so it will have a very good 2-degree slope, which means drainage will be natural and easy. I think mostly that was because it was a beautiful site right next to the mountains.
What was the process of getting that site ready to draw out a master plan? Like, what was the decision-making process behind what is retained and what is relocated?
I don't know. So basically, the whole site for Chandigarh, the area that was required for building the city as laid out by A.L. Fletcher, was acquired by eminent domain. The idea that the state needs this land and you have to leave. And that's how it was basically done. And, idea was as the sectors were built that the villages would be relocated. And everything started, the architect's office was located in Nagla in sector 19.
19.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then sector 22 and the other sectors were developed first, and the villages were erased. In the first phase, all the villages were relocated basically via eminent domain. The only things that were retained from the villages were the temples and the gurdwaras. Everything else was erased.
So when you say erased, you mean they were relocated to a site nearby, or were they given housing in the new city?
I don't really know, but I think they were basically given land and housing outside the city, not in the city. I don't think they were given anything inside the city.
Other than the ones that stayed, like, Burrell and
In the second
Kansal.
phase, During Indira Gandhi's time, the villages protested and organized much better. So Burrell, etc., they managed to, retain their dwellings, although their agricultural lands were taken by eminent.
Yeah, Budal is very present, but it goes sort of against the grid.
That's right. So all the villages, etc., were based on the north, south, east, west grid. No? But Chandigarh was aligned to line up with the drainage of the site.
Right.
On the Patyaliki Rao and Kansali Rao, oriented northeast, southwest.
Some trees were also retained, weren't they?
All the original
Like
trees,
some really older.
all the original trees were retained. But there were very few original trees because it's agricultural land. Agriculture is done by clearing out the trees, right? There were very few trees on the Chandigarh side. Even now, when you fly over Punjab, you don't see much trees.
Yeah.
Because it's all agricultural land.
So the trees that did end up being retained, do you think that they were the ones, the lucky ones that didn't interfere with the plan, sort of blended in nicely, or was there tweaks to the plan to accommodate these trees?
There were tweaks to the plan to accommodate the trees. All the trees were retained. But like I'm saying, there weren't many. I think there is one of those roads also bends a little bit to accommodate the trees, one of the north-south roads.
There's one at the lake, isn't it?
One on the lake, yeah. That is, of course, the famous, there's recently a story being told about it that somebody planted it for his son who died. That story was published recently in the newspapers. But I think that tree was, slated to be cut down because they built the dam over there. Right? It was right on the dam. But somehow they retained that. Though I don't know what the story of that tree is exactly. I mean, how did it end up on top of the dam? I've never understood. If it was there before the dam, then how did it end up on top of the dam?
And after Meyer and Nowicki have drawn up the plan, Nowicki tragically passes away on a flight.
Yeah.
And then Varma and Thapar are again on the hunt for an architect. They go to Europe, right?
Yeah, they go to Europe to look strictly for a replacement for Mathew Nowicki.
Okay.
End up with Corbusier.
At this point, Meyer hasn't backed out, you're saying?
At this point, Meyer is still the master planner. But there's a little backstory to this. The backstory is that Meyer was making his drawings, and Meyer didn't really get along with Varma and Thapar, basically. Varma and Thapar, Varma, I think in particular, didn't really like Albert Meyer. I don't know why, but they had some conflict. So when Nowicki came, Nowicki came to Shimla, and he was given one room in the Cecil Hotel, I think. And I think M.N. Sharma was the first person, Indian architect hired. And M.N. Sharma was assigned to work with Mathew Nowicki. But I don't think M.N. Sharma knew anything much. So Mathew Nowicki just sat in the hotel room and made drawing after drawing after drawing, designing the buildings of Chandigarh. And he could draw like a bandit. He was he had an amazing hand and a fantastic imagination. All those drawings that have been published, are well known. A lot of them are in the Chandigarh Museum also.
Right.
So basically, Varma told Nowicki, you do the whole project. And Meyer was also busy, in Ottawa. He was working, he wanted to do the ideological project with Gandhiji. I'm going to make model villages and this, that. And, he was much more idealistic in that sense. And he was building this city basically, I think, out of courtesy to Nehru. How do you say no to Nehru? Nobody can say no to Nehru, no. But I think his heart was probably more in the model villages project that Gandhiji wanted. So basically, Varma Thapar, I think Varma basically told Nowicki, okay, you just move to Chandigarh and you design and make the whole city, and we will back you. And so they're already sort of made up their mind to push out Albert Meyer. And they offered the project to Mathew Nowicki. And Mathew Nowicki said, okay, yes. And he said, okay, I'm going to go back to the USA and I'm going to bring my wife and two boys, my family, and I'm going to bring them back to Chandigarh and we are going to start doing this. And that's the flight he was taking back to the United States, which crashed over Egypt. So Varma and Thapar took the opportunity and said, oh, we need to find a replacement for Nowicki. But they knew they were going to try and look for a replacement who would replace Meyer also and just take over the whole project. They wanted somebody to just take over and start the project. Even though by the time Corbusier was hired, the brief given to Corbusier was to execute Meyer's plan. His job was to work with that.
Right. That initial effort was not in vain.
That was what was given to Corbusier. We've already made the master plan and you just have to continue. But, Corbusier being the dada that he always was, he was like, well, I'll do it my way.
I've never heard this version. You always hear that Meyer backed out because he was so taken aback by Nowicki's passing, and that he always thought that it was two of them that were doing this and he can't do it alone. That's what you hear and read.
No. See, once Corbusier was hired, Meyer tried to come in, also be part of the team, but Corbusier basically pushed him into the corner and relegated him, in part also because Albert Meyer was very close to Louis Mumford in America. And Louis Mumford hated Le Corbusier and launched major public attacks on Le Corbusier. So Corbusier knew that. And Corbusier hated America in general anyway. So when Le Corbusier was hired, it was a huge blow to Albert Meyer and Louis Mumford. They hated it. And later on, they launched their attacks on Chandigarh, via Norma Evanson and so on, in the 60s to take revenge, in a sense. But Corbusier also, he was like, oh yeah, no, you are one of Louis Mumford's people. Forget it. I'm not going to give you the time of day. He barely gave Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew time of day, who were like big Corbusier groupies. But we can come to all that in the next episode. But Meyer was basically pushed out.
But what's interesting is that you only hear about Meyer and Nowicki sort of in isolation. You don't hear of a team surrounding them or under them in the way that you hear about the team that we know of.
Yeah, there was no team because Meyer
was only
prepared the master plan in New York. When he went back to New York, he sat down with his office and basically prepared the master plan sitting in New York. And then he hired Mathew Nowicki, and then Mathew Nowicki made all the drawings that we know of sitting in a hotel in Shimla. And he would have continued to work, and the first person assigned to work with him was M. N. Sharma. So the rest of the team was assembled after Jean-Rey, Maxwell Fry, Corbusier, etc. were hired. They all came into the project afterwards.
Thanks for listening to The Story of Chandigarh. This is your host and producer, Ishan Chofla. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can email us at storyofchandigarh@gmail.com. We'll continue our conversation in the next episode. Until then, this is The Story of Chandigarh.